Welcome, everybody. There's gonna be a lot of stuff. Happy to help. Hopefully, everybody can hear me. So I'm Bruce Calder. I'm the VP of Consulting Services here at Claigan. I'm going to be your host. Hopefully, it's not very dry. It shouldn't be. So a lot of this course focused on the hump next year. There's a regulatory hump for companies. They had a whole bunch of deadlines. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'm going to mention also the a lot of other stuff. But there's a big, especially in a work profile group of stuff coming up. It's the hump between July and October next year. Minnesota PFAS being the starting one. Then Australian Declaring Plus, a new V3028 ban and disclosure in Australia. Most people don't realize that even if your use, say, VV328 in LCD screens is exempted as an essential use, you still have to reach SVHC-like disclosure. So we're going to talk about that. The Canadian Plastics Registry, consumer, professional, and facility waste, September of next year. That's a really big one. And then US TSCA PFAS reporting. I'm not going to talk too much about it today. It might have a slight change. We don't really know. And Minnesota PFAS comes first. But between July and October, there is a big hump. So I'm going to talk about, of course, about Minnesota PFAS. It's quite a bit going on there. And then Australia, and I talk about the ICAM's restrictions and disclosures. And I talk, of course, about the Canadian Plastics Registry. So a small number of consumers this year, electronics and packaging. Next year is everything else. And the professional stuff and facility generated waste. And then US TSCA. I'm going to talk a little bit about that one. I talk mostly in the Minnesota context because that's the first one. I'll talk more in the Minnesota context. Now, a lot of people have been preparing stuff for the US TSCA federal one. Minnesota PFAS is quite different. So before we go to Minnesota PFAS, I'm going to talk a little bit about them. There's a legal judgment actually disapproving the rule briefly. Minnesota's actually got a neat system. So normally, if there's a U.S. rule, the rule, in this case, is like the Minnesota Pollution Control, can create rules based on powers and statutes from the legislators. And normally when that happens, and then some industry group usually challenges it, goes to court, there's a big fight over it. Minnesota does it a bit differently. They actually move the rule right to a judge right off the bat. And the judge goes through with that based on feedback and has a legal judgment. So that underlined judgment is the actual judgment. So when you get the slides, you can go there. And so they found 6 deficiencies that need to be completed before reporting can occur. So if right now the Minnesota judge still has everything on track for July, says you can still do July, you just need to correct these deficiencies first. There's a number of deficiencies. That's a little hard to read. Like, oh, one of the deficiencies is Minnesota Rule 7026.0010, subparagraph 14 is deficient. And you're like, oh, of course. No, it's actually not that obvious. I will actually explain what they mean. So there are 6 deficiencies, 5 in one group and one very different one. Short summary, the 2026 reporting is actually on target. So you might hear it's disapproved. No, it just needs a fix. It's basically say, look, if you don't fix it, this is not going forward, but you got to fix it. So Minnesota has to fix the 6 deficiencies before the final rule is approved. So there's 6 deficiencies. Most of them aren't so bad from their point of view. So I'm going to talk about the first one second, just to make life complicated. I'll talk about the last 5 out of 6. These are little ones like that amazing one, 7026.0010, subparagraph 14. It's a definition of a manufacturer. So they said the definition of manufacturer is too ambiguous and didn't match. Well, hopefully they'll be able to hear me. Somebody say can hear me. You should be able to hear. If anybody else can't hear, tell me, but it's probably hopefully your end. People probably told me by now. Definition of the manufacturer. It's a little too ambiguous. It doesn't match the statute. So that's a key part of it. It has to match the statute. And there's as long as they change the definition to match the original one, they're fine. The recertification annually, they're saying you didn't link it to where it is in the statute. So you can say you have to do annual recertification. Cool, but you have to link it to the statute. If you don't link it to the statute, it's not allowed. So Minnesota is very different. It's forward-looking, and you have to recertify forward-looking each year. They're like, okay, you wrote the recertification requirement. Where is that in the statute? So they didn't link it. There are 2 around pesticides. So basically, if you have a pesticide that's got fluoros in it, that's already registered in the state of Minnesota, it's already been reported, so you don't have to do it again. So you can get a waiver, but the process is not clear. Also, if you've already reported the PFAS Department of Agriculture in a pesticide, you don't normally have to do it, or a food product, agricultural product. The overlapping of reporting requirements is not clear. It's really specific to agriculture, like pesticides and stuff. So it doesn't really apply to most people. And the fees. And they said, well, based on the math, back of the envelope, you're supposed to, so the statute says you can collect money to pay your costs. Awesome, but I did it back of the envelope, and you say your costs are 6 million, and this might back envelope collect between 15 and 22 million. That doesn't agree. You've got to either redo the costs or redo the fees. All of these are relatively simple things. I mean, the agriculture stuff's not super simple, like how do you do the waiver, but it's a really small piece of the puzzle. Definition of manufacturer, just use the one in the statute, and the annual recertification. Either it's in the statute, just link to it, or you can't have it. So it should be pretty straightforward. The first one of the six is a little more complicated. It's complicated because Minnesota had a good point, and they thought their good point would carry the day, and it didn't. So they have to, as part of the statute, identify the effect of combined US and Minnesota PFAS reporting. Minnesota is not supposed to be doing stuff that's at the federal level, like not duplicated legislation. And so what industry said, well, it's PFAS reporting. They're both PFAS reporting. And Minnesota said, actually, we're totally different. So there's no point even looking at an assessment. Judge is like, well, they both say PFAS reporting. So you should do an assessment. Why? To support your point, other than saying, we're totally different. That's not enough. So the agency failed to include an assessment of the cumulative effect of the proposed rules of federal regulation of PFAS reporting. Minnesota basically says, no point doing an assessment. We're totally different. We're unique. Judge said, well, you call PFAS reporting. So can you be a little more specific? So this might be a little more detailed. This is required in the statute. They have to do this evaluation. It was just missing because the people who wrote it said, well, we're totally unique. So we don't have to do this. And the judge said, well, you're both PFAS reporting. So it's not that unique. You got to give me more detail. And it is true. I mean, it is quite different. The US TSCA is retroactive based on what was in the products, and you're reporting PFAS, not products. Minnesota is forward-looking, what's in the products being sold in their state going forward. It's quite different. It's a very, very different. Like there's no overlap between the two, actually. One is forward, one is retrospective. They're quite different. They just have to state that. So very straightforward. They should be able to make this update, but should not be that hard to complete. But they have to. There's six of them. So depending on the resources, it should be straightforward. However, they seem to be pretty easy fixes, especially like where in the statute or your definition doesn't agree exact language-wise. Okay. More to come. A delay in the reporting time was not expected. Even the judge doesn't have a reporting delay in there. But we'll wait. But still, wow, I wrote those words myself. We'll still get the Minnesota response, and that is what, if they say, hey, no, we're not going to make it because of these, then that'll change. But they first have to evaluate it. This whole thing was from August 28th. They might have got a preamble during the hearings of what their problems were. There is a good point. Like you said, yours is completely different, but you're both PFAS reporting. Be more specific of why you're different. And they're different. Minnesota PFAS is forward looking. It's actually very different. So as somebody who does the work, they're very different, actually. We can use some of the data interchangeably, but the reporting is actually quite different. It is forward-looking. It's very, so TSCA is like, what fluoropolymers were in your products, and you don't have to say which products, what fluoropolymers were in your products that you imported between 2011 and 2022. Retrospective, and you report the PFAS, not the products. Minnesota is forward-looking. What products have PFAS, and which PFAS are they in, and why are they in it? Forward-looking. So they both have function, but one is a function historic, one is a function forward-looking, and it's actually quite a bit different. So the data sets are actually different. I mean, some of the chemical, PFAS is PFAS. The polymers will often be the same, but it's very forward-looking. So it's what PFAS in your products under your brand this coming year. So when you report in July, it's for 2026, it's for the rest of 2026, which is relatively short. As long as the recertification is approved, each February, like 2027, you're going to report the PFAS in your products being sold over the next year. So it's forward-looking. Often when we do this, a lot of companies, here's my sales data. I don't care about volumes. It doesn't matter. There's no volume part of this. It's product, PFAS, function of the PFAS. That's what we're reporting. Not I sold, 47 products with, PTFE in it. No, you're reporting refrigerators, PTFE. It's there for anti-friction or refrigeration, FEP, dielectric constant, and high temperature. So you're reporting a function. It's what products you're selling in this coming year. Oh, good question. Somebody said if it's $1,000 per report or per company. Yes, they did qualify. It's $1,000 per company. It's still supposedly going to raise more money than they need, which I'm sure legislators like works for me. So there might be a few things. So $1,000 per company, $500 a year to recertify. So, um, does this apply to food products? Good question. I'm going to double check. I believe it's everything. I think everything's in scope. There's a few minor exemptions like defense, national defense, but I believe all food products are in here too, whether it's the product or the packaging or the frying pan, all that kind of things in it. By the way, one project we're looking at this year is, and I presented in DC last week, this week actually, and wonderful discussion. I was on a panel with an NGO and well-meaning people, and we're talking about PFAS, and it's a very broad family, and there are some that are dangerous, especially in high concentrations. There's some that are very, very minutely dangerous, and there's ones that are incredibly safe. We want to separate the incredibly safe ones from the mildly dangerous and the dangerous ones. Not mild, like minutely dangerous ones and the dangerous ones. Like PTFE frying pan doesn't degrade into any PFAS you find in water, nor is it made from it. It's not related. It's as far apart as your food dish is, which is polyethylene, like food container you send with your kids, and alcohol. They're very different things. I mean, both your container you send with your kid to school is an alkane, so is the alcohol. They're structurally very related, but they're chemically quite different. Their food container doesn't become alcohol midstream. You don't end up with a bunch of rowdy, surly 4-year-olds in the afternoon in the kindergarten because all their food dishes turned into alcohol. They're quite different. It's the same thing with your frying pan. So one of the projects we're looking at this year, dependably, is we've actually tested tons of frying pans. To prove a point, we'll test all of them and show they don't have nor they contain any substance that cause hazard. They're targeted for a lot of things, but they're the wrong problem. A lot of times, even in Minnesota, is like, oh, this school has this PFAS in the water supply. Cool, which ones? There's a fingerprint, by the way. It's very specific which ones. And the one school they're pointing at, whose name I can't pronounce, it's quite exotic. Um, it's from firefighting foam. It's unique to firefighting foam. So is the entire lake that feeds their water system. It has it too. It's something upstream there. But it's not your frying pans. It has PFAS in there that frying pans do not remotely have. That you can't invent elements. That's kind of a key thing. Like you're not having a nuclear reaction like the sun in your frying pan and creating new elements. You can't create elements that are not there. So again, the first reporting for 2026 is July 2026, unless this rewrite or just a little correction, more of a correction of the final rule. It's really a correction, not a rewrite, delays things. So we're still looking at July 2026. You report by product groupings. And this is the thing, most companies have not spent the right effort on it. They're like collecting data, often because somebody sold you a product. And the reason they sold you a product is because they want you for revenue, not because they did the right thing. When we do it, what we always do for these reporting things is look what the report is and then work our way backwards. If something doesn't contribute to that report or isn't useful peripherally for something else, then why are you doing this? You're not necessarily doing this for fun. However, reporting is very important. It isn't just compliance. And one big thing came from the conference. We had regulators there and lobbyists and everything and people in the industry. When you report something to the government, it is very difficult for them to restrict it. So reporting is very important. So you take Tosca, really good example. PIP 3-in-1, banned a couple years ago. And the reason it was banned is because they did a survey of chemical industry, and the chemical industry said they didn't have it. And then, well, it's not there, so it's easy to ban. We'll just ban it, no problem. It's dangerous, nobody uses it, so we can ban it. Turns out it's in most electronics. But if somebody reported it initially, it wouldn't have been banned originally. That's the same thing is true in Canada and other jurisdictions. Canada was going to ban PFOA and longer, which I'm all about. It makes sense. It is moderately dangerous in physical products, not good at all in water. But we're like, okay, cool. You got to give the Canadian industry some time because a lot of the winter apparel still has it on the outside. It makes the best waterproof. They're like, well, Canadian government's like, no, it doesn't. It's not there anymore. I'm like, no, we test all the time. I'm pretty sure. And I go, no, it's not. We did a consultation and one company reported and they said they weren't using it anymore. I'm like, you're basing the entire law of one company reporting on a consultation I've never heard of before. So we said challenge accepted. We took 13 kids' gloves in 2024 and showed 11 of them are polyfluorocoated fluoroacrylics. And that also creates a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of the PFOA, minuscule bit of the bad PFOA stuff. And then I actually don't have it in here, but then we actually in 2025 did exposure testing. One of the neat things about waterproof coatings is things don't come out in sweat. So we can show the PFOA family, though it is there in absolute minuscule levels, actually doesn't even come. So reporting is important. And so they didn't ban PFOA yet because they're like, wait a second, it's actually used. I'm like, yeah, you just it's right there. Just test it. Like that's what I say to most regulators. Have you actually tried, or is this more than a paper exercise? And there are a lot of and paper exercise is the worst. It's one of the reasons why, like anybody saw our last presentation, why 40% of the products we tested in Canada are absolutely sky high of the chemical that causes ADHD is because it's all the regulation of DHP is caught in paperwork. Um, a lot of it's branded. I think there's a new SEPA branding, like every candidate is Canadian is promised justified healthy environment, but that's just branding. There's actually no healthy environment part under it. It's pretty bad. So reporting here though is by product grouping. Reporting is important because not only do you have to do it, if you report it, it's not going to get regulated. And by the way, whatever you have in your product, so does everyone else. Um, so you report the PFAS in product groups. You can do it individually. You can be as granular as you want, but it's really hard to maintain it a product by product basis, and you don't need to. Product categorization is complicated. So oversimplification, starting point. I really should write, there's really two criteria. Use a common customs code, the 8-digit. 8-digit number is a good start, oversimplification. However, if it use the 8-digit code, and then if everything under the 8-digit code you could describe with the same word, a pair of words, that's good. However, there are cases also where the 6-digit one you could describe with a word or pair of words. An example for that are refrigerators. For some reason, like single door fridges and double door fridges and are actually very different customs codes, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So we normally put all fridges together, whether you have one or two doors, and then maybe fridge freezer separately, and maybe freezer separate than that. Like it's pretty intelligent. The same thing if using 8-digit medical code. You can't just take the miscellaneous category and just back the dump truck up and dump every medical device under like code 90 and miscellaneous into one thing. That you have to be able to describe it as still at least in like one or two words. And I'll show some good examples in a moment. So other things, you're reporting by product family, yes, per PFAS. And it's an interesting question whether if it's a multifunction PFAS, whether you report it more than once. So imagine you have the CAS number is similar. A lot of the fluoropolymers don't have CAS numbers. They may have accession numbers. They're often made from ingredients which have CAS numbers, but it does not. Especially coatings in particular. Also, PTFE is probably one of the broadest polymer categories I've ever seen. We test it all the time. You can have a lot of impurity, so. At what point? So poly PTFE and ETFE are like in a continuum. Same thing as low density and high density polyethylene. It's like how many things have to happen before it moves from one name to the other. So if we get PTFE with a tiny bit of polyethylene in it, very small amount, it's still called PTFE. Semi-arbitrary of how much polyethylene has to be in there for it to be ETFE, which is ethylene tetrafluoride. It's kind of an interesting problem. So the CAS numbers, which are polymer size, a bit interesting. Don't fall over yourself on the CAS number. Close enough is pretty good. Polymers are not a simple answer. The concentration range in the component or product. Anyone who's working with us a long time, we always do that. The function of the PFAS. So anybody's worked with us for a while, we've always had to answer it two ways. In Minnesota, it was not clear whether it's going to be a long discussion or it's going to be a single word. So in the new version of the reporting, it's going to be a single or two words. I'll show you examples. It's a lot easier. So the function options, it's going to be a single pull down menu of single functions, like the EPA function list. It's actually going to be the EPA function list with a few additions. Expected to include the list of functions in TSCA EPA. It actually says in the reporting rule, with some additional functions added by Minnesota, because the TSCA rule is actually not great for PFAS. It's built for chemicals, not physical products. So it misses a lot of things on friction and surfactant, a bunch of other stuff, especially in the physical products. Friction, it's really quite poor. Dielectric constant. It's not great on that. So we use another category right now. We expect for the TSCA side, we expect to have some of those other become actually a new code in Minnesota. So we're currently using the EPA one for this thing with some other functions in there. Now, many things will have multiple functions, and that's going to be interesting how to report that. So you take ETFE, wire, ETFE wire is super common. It's in your Wi-Fi router. If I took an infrared camera out in the next room, the hottest thing in the room will be your Wi-Fi router. It has like whatever's powering all this communication right now with all the, 50 to 100 computers we have over there. It's going hot, very, very hot. And PVC hookup wire can't handle that temperature. Silicone could, like in your oven, like you go inside your oven, you see sometimes huge, thick wiring. That's silicone. Silicone can handle the temperature. The problem is its dielectric constant sucks. So it has to be super thick. You can't take super thick, like hose size wire and put them in your tablet or Wi-Fi router. It's too big. So they have to use something with a much better dielectric constant while handling the temperature, and that's FEP or ETFE. So their function is both temperature, dielectric constant, and actual flexibility. PTFE is not used in the wiring in your coffee machine or your router or tablet because it's actually not flexible. ETFE and FEP, which are variations on it, they're very similar, but they've got some other things going on in them. They're quite flexible. So ETFE wire has three functions. It's the high temperature, it's the dielectric constant, and it's the flexibility. It's interesting when you have three of them, what can we do there? So in Tosca, we can list all three actually. It's a little confusing in Minnesota how that's going to roll out. So right now we list all three, and then we're going to see what they do. So flexibility is actually a big reason why ETFE is used over PTFE. PTFE or Teflon is generally not flexible. So I'm going to give an example of medical grouping, medical devices grouping. So we'll say endoscopes, which is a great one because a lot of medical companies have it, but it's also quite a varied families. I will say the HS code is 9018, 9020, 8 digits, and includes things that are called endoscopes. It could be endoscopes, and you're like, well, that's not very, that's what you called it. True. It could be capsule endoscopes, which look quite different. And it could be like hysteroscopes, which are also endoscopes, but they're called something different. But they're all the same customs code, and you could call these all reasonably endoscopes. So they also come sometimes with a monitor, a camera attached to them. Often they are covered under the same kitting. Medical devices have a lot of kitting together under the same HS code. So we can choose to move the camera separately, which is a possibility. But if it uses the same HS code as the endoscope, it might actually be reasonable to include here. Even though it looks different, it's all part of the same system. And the products, so the way we define it, you can put every product code, we like part number, but you see, funny thing about a lot of products is what you sell is a pallet of them or a kitting of them, and part numbers just don't work out, especially for it's amazing we do people like sales numbers. I'm like, this doesn't match at all. So we do at a much higher level, like these numbers are all made up, by the way. GI Master, the capsule cam, Clearview. By the way, these might actually be real product names. I don't know. I just made these up. The Sharp View, etc. And so the way to describe is by HS code and the brand or family, like GI Master. This way, if you have a 20-inch GI Master and a 24-inch GI Master, and you have accessories with the GI Master, they're all included in the same thing. And if Minnesota doesn't like it, then they can make comment. You've done your best efforts. And next year in recertification, like you did tell them all the PFAS and why they're there. If they really want you to split, say the camera off the endoscope, then you can. So on and so forth. So same with the refrigerators. We probably put the refrigerators together, and this is the axial line and the pro line and whatever makes sense together. And then, but if your fridge freezer, you probably put them together, which is, by the way, most refrigerators are both. Wine coolers we probably separate them, even though they're structurally very similar. They're very similar PFAS, but try to be mostly reasonable about it. And the idea is not to mislead them. It's still say, everything we're selling is in here. You can see it, and it says what PFAS and where we have it. Now, it's not saying it's this individual part because you don't have to. And it's not saying I sell 10,000 because you don't have to. You just have to say why they're there. You don't have to say, hey, I'm using this in my tubing or it's in the handle, unless the function code has that. But you have the function code. Friction resistance, high temperature, dielectric constant, all the good things. So that's Minnesota PFAS. That's one of the big ones. And if you're gathering data from suppliers and you haven't thought about merging products, you're gonna have to redo everything, which is kind of a pain. When they reach out to us, we generally, from an engineering point of view, have to redo everybody's data from Minnesota because they're going down the wrong path. They think they have a piece of software and that solves their problems. And their supplier said, this has PFAS in it. Cool. There's so many pieces of data that are missing here. But the funny thing is because it's forward looking and you don't have numbers, once you have an ETFU wiring, it doesn't matter if you have 8, 14, it doesn't matter if the endoscope has it and a stereoscope doesn't. You just put the ETFU wire in for all the endoscopes. Um, so a lot of what you're doing is trying to find out if there's anything missing. So that's how we approach it a lot with the engineering side. And it's also what can be in your product. So if next year you end up being, you have a part that has a PFAS you didn't think of, they didn't have in your product, you can't sell it. So you want to be a little more inclusive on Minnesota. So the other big one is the Canadian Federal Plastic Registry, where you have to report the plastics in your packaging, the plastics in certain plastic products, electronics are plastic products, cars are plastic products, and the plastics in the waste your facility in Canada generates. So the first deadline is September 29th, 2025. It's on the consumer side for very specific products. So the deadline for consumer for electronics, packaging, and I'll show the examples in a moment, very specific single-use products like coffee lids, but very specific, is like 11 days from now. September 29th, if you haven't done it, you can get an extension, but you only get 1 month. Everybody gets only 1 month. Deadline for submission for industrial and all the other products, even the consumer side for like apparel and stuff, and I'll talk about them, is 2026. So the difference in consumer and industrial, if it's simple answer, and I'll talk to the complicated one, simple answer, if it's at the bottom of your driveway, if at the end of life it'd be disposed of at the bottom of somebody's driveway, consumer. If at the end of life it's disposed by a business, like something like here, and it's the dumpster out back, that's professional or industrial. And the full definition is if the consumer has decision on disposal, then it's consumer. So if you sell somebody an air conditioner, and normally when you sell them a new air conditioner, you give them the option of the installer to take it back and dispose of it as a professional. That's still consumer because the consumer had the decision making on disposal. So like air conditioners or even arguably furnaces for a house, the consumer has decision. They could still, if they wanted to, not that they would, drop it off at the electronics disposal run by the city or whomever on their own. It's consumer. Now, who is responsible is different than US TSCA. Minnesota, PFAS, and Canadian Plastics are both brand owner, which is different than Canadian PFAS reporting, which is importer, and US TSCA, which is importer. This is brand owner. So the brand owner is responsible if they're located in Canada. Located in Canada means you have a Canadian Revenue Agency business ID. If no brand owner is located in Canada, it's the importer. So it's brand owner responsibility unless the brand owner isn't located in Canada, then Steve. The plastics import, so we have to report is the plastics imported in the products and packaging, the plastics sold in the products and packaging. These are separate, by the way. The plastics manufactured, so if you make cars in Canada, you report the plastic manufactured, even though you export most of it, it's plastic manufactured. And the plastic waste generated. So if you have a restaurant, it's what you generate. So a really good example on the consumer side is somebody, if you've been up here, Tim Hortons. So the stuff they have a quite vibrant drive-through business. The stuff they sell at the drive-through, like the plastic cups, which are reportable, at the drive-through go home. Those are consumer. The stuff they sell in store, a portion of it stays in store, is consumed in store, throws out in the store's garbage, and that's part of the store's garbage. That's actually industrial. So the in-house waste is industrial. So one thing Tim Hortons has to do, for example, is estimate, and they probably have decent numbers, how much of the product goes home or out and how much stays and goes in their waste. Because one is consumer residential reporting, one is professional or ICI reporting. So they're all reported separately. So you report the amount of plastics in your products imported, the amount of the plastics in your products sold, which is often a very similar number, the plastics in your products you manufactured, and the plastics in the waste you've generated if they're over 1 ton a year. Plastic waste generated over 1 ton a year, you need about, for pure employee operations, about 100 employees will generate enough plastic waste. But if you have a store or a manufacturing facility or a distribution facility, it doesn't take much to get over 1 ton. A really good example would be a mechanics or service center. They actually have multiple streams. And generally, the small mechanic doesn't get above 1 ton for most things, except for tires. Tires are a reportable category. They do over 1 ton of tires disposal a year. So it's based on the weight of the electronics or the tire of the car, not the weight of plastic in them. So phase 1 is consumer electronics. So it's reporting in 11 days. Consumer packaging, And some very specific single-use plastics like solo cups and takeaway containers and stuff like that. And it's the plastics in the electronics and the consumer packaging. Now imagine you take something like Coke bottles, which you can buy in a store like with an overwrap and like a pack of 12, and you take it home. The bottle is consumer, the packaging is consumer, but also the same product that you might have bought at Costco or Loblaws or whichever, or Metro, and could be sold to a corner store. The corner store takes the bottles out and puts them into a case. Those are still those end up being consumer, but then they throw out the wrap. That's professional, and you can estimate what percentage of your business is each. September 2026. Professional electronics are in scope if they're in scope of EU ROHS. Plastic registry uses the same categories EU ROHS. It's relatively straightforward. Basically, if you're large scale fixed installation, like you're part of a nuclear reactor, you're not in scope. You're part of like an oil rigger, not in scope. Your packaging still is, but the electronics is not. Professional packaging. So imagine you sell a consumer product that goes home and has a poly bag inside. That's consumer. However, when you sell it to, I don't know, Walmart and it's got overwrap around it and Walmart takes the overwrap around it and disposes of it, that's professional. Cars are in scope. Textile. So of course, imagine you make shirts and often they go to a store. The store takes them out of the plastic bag. The shirts are reportable consumer. The bag, if taken off and disposed of by the store, is actually professional. But if you have e-commerce and you're sending packages in plastic bags to residences, that's consumer packaging. So another new thing about apparel, it's only plastics that are reportable. Rubber is not reportable, cellulose is not reportable. So nylon and polyester are plastics. Rayon is cellulose, as is wool and cotton. They're not reportable. And neither are rubber boots. Construction, doors, windows, eavesdropping, all the plastics in that. Tires, which is a hilarious problem because it would seem like a really good reportable, except for synthetic rubber is not a reportable in the plastics registry, which is 90+% of the weight there. Well, there's a little bit of metal in there too. Metal's not reportable either, nor is rubber. That leaves like the Kevlar or nylon cross strapping inside of it, and then the little plastic nozzle on the top. I'm not sure they realize that the categories they have plastics don't include tires. That's a synthetic rubber. Plus, the plastic waste you generate in Canadian facilities. Again, this is Canada. Your warehousing or stores and restaurants. It's not limited to business types. It's just you need 1 ton of plastic waste generated. Hospitals, so if you make medical devices, they're probably going to ask you a lot. Hospitals produce a lot of waste. Repair centers, these are all just good examples. Like mechanics, the average mechanic won't produce enough except for in tires, and they do a lot of tires reporting anyways. The complicated thing is how much plastic's actually in the tire. It's very little. It's like under 5% of its weight. So what you have to do is you have to take your electronics data, then you take how much you sell of this is medical devices here, times, so how much plastic is in this infusion pump, times how many you sell a year, merge them all together, because you don't report infusion pumps, you don't report endoscopes, you don't report catheters, you report nylon in electronic medical devices. You report polyester. So you have to merge it all into one, kilograms or tons of nylon, kilograms, tons of polyester, so on and so forth. And then you have to do the same thing with the flexible packaging and your rigid packaging. Oversimplification Canada, if you have a packaging, if you put something in your packaging and take it out again and it doesn't change shape, rigid. If you put it in and take it out and changes shape, that's flexible. So then you have to merge them all together. You report electronics, flexible, rigid separately. We're doing some like consumer retailers right now. They have not only flexible packaging, rigid packaging, but then they could have IT equipment, appliances, medical devices, which are some, and they're all reported separately. So it's an interesting project. Just a bit of work. This is AI Brian. We usually add him whenever things get super busy. Now, it's a major Excel exercise. We're really good at it, about the plastic side and putting it all together. So another complexity is like you don't sell one refrigerator. You sell 44 different types. By the way, if you look at any brands here, I just picked the first one came up in Google Images, so don't read into it too far. You also don't sell one air conditioner. Same thing in the medical devices. What's the first one that comes to Google? You sell 31 different air conditioners. So what you normally do, and this is allowed, it's called the average bill of materials. Instead of creating 41 specific plastic models, you choose a representative product, use it as a model, use it as the average bill of materials. It's actually an average bill of materials of an average bill of materials. You don't want to bother with, don't start data gathering all the plastics in your circuit board. It's going to make your head hurt. So what we normally do is we've done a lot of circuit boards. We create an average circuit board model, and then we use that. And so all we care about is the weight of your circuit boards. On average, it averages out the main epoxies, thermoset resin, You have nylon connectors, you have PBT connectors, you have polyester connectors, you have ABS connectors, you have some PVC wiring, et cetera. It all averages out. So does the wire cables. We care what the outer jacket is because sometimes they're HPN, sometimes they're PVC, et cetera. And then what are the main pieces? Like if the outer housing of this was ABS and the shelves are polycarbonate, that does make a big difference. So you basically use the average bill of materials for some of the components, like circuit boards, and then you do the others more specifically. You create a model for a fridge, and then you use the plastic data for that product and you apply it to all the related products scaled by weight. So if you have another fridge that's 3/4 the weight and it's close enough, it's use the average bill of materials to use the exact same data, but 3/4 of it times whatever volume of sales. You're going to find if you do this properly, what's going to end up happening is you're going to get 70% of it done and you're going to have a 30% miscellaneous category or larger. We also have to create models for average electronics. And the idea is we got good enough this year. Year one should be good enough. Year two is better. Year three is best, which isn't necessarily perfect. And we improve on it in second year. So a lot of the work we do in year one, we get a lot of the big data out of the way, and then we improve it a bit in year two and do all the regeneration. So we end up having a report. Now, you don't do it this way. This is columns. This makes a lot of sense. And the provinces are in the right order, like Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, PI, New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario, and the territories at the end. And that makes a lot of sense. That's not how it's done, unfortunately, in their system, but it's a lot easier to read this way. You report all the polyester in electronics, imported, manufactured, placed in the market in Canada, and sold in each province. You don't have to know the provincial data. You can actually use the average, the Canadian data, and scale it against population, which you can also work the way backwards. If you like consumer and you have packaging data for like Alberta and Quebec and Ontario, you're allowed to scale it back up to Canada and then scale it back down to the provinces. Then all the other polyester resins, which is PBT, polybutyl terephthalate. It's the connectors, but it's also a lot of lamps. You get a lot of stores. Low density polyethylene, linear low densities, one after another, and so on and so forth. And then you have to redo it again for flexible packaging and rigid packaging. So example kind of looks like this. This is just electronics and packaging. So there's somebody who did appliances because electrical equipment's on the left, then appliances. You're doing it by subcategory. So medical devices would be different grouping. IT equipment's a different grouping. Toys is a different grouping. And then you report all the each plastics. This is how much polyester we have, how much thermoplastic polyester, PBT, how many high density polyethylene, etc. Is it virgin or recycled? Unless you've really tried, it's all virgin. This is the residential one. If 70% of your sales are residential and 30% are professional, you report them separately. And then you do it again with your packaging. The facility plastic, and then the facility ones in 2026, you do roughly the same thing. What we actually end up having to do, like practically, we're really good at the facility side. We'll make it really easy. Is basically you first figure out what streams you have. So if you take the mechanics, they have some plastic garbage from the regular operations. It usually goes in the garbage. It's often not a blue bin. Automotive parts. So cars are in scope if you sell them, but not the parts if you sell them. But everything in the car that's disposed of is car waste and it's reportable. So they'll have it like they'll replace different solenoids and a bunch of other things, bits of plastics. They often throw that out in the main garbage stream. So the main garbage stream is really important. Then they'll also have a different stream where they have like oil containers, different sizes. Those are picked up and disposed of separately. It's a different stream. You might have be putting numbers together, but something else you have to monitor. And then they also dispose of tires, which is one of the categories and probably the largest by weight or volume of all their categories. And normally the average mechanics won't be above 1 ton except for tires. But imagine they're quite large one, like a dealership's one or something larger. What you have to do is we have 3 streams: the garbage, the take back or take away on the oil containers, and the tire take back. So then we want to know how many kilograms per, say, month of each, and then what's in it. And you're probably not specialist in plastics. We have a pretty neat way to do it. You take pictures of your waste, and we can break it down back to the plastics. We have models here for basically everything you see in your waste, which, for funny enough, employee waste in Canada is dominated by yogurt tubs. So most containers they bring in with food. If it wasn't from takeout, they often take home. The exceptions are yogurt tubs are often disposed of at the workplace. But that's also why it takes about 100 employees to get up to 1 ton of that kind of waste. If you have distribution facilities and manufacturing, it goes up pretty darn fast. So this is what has to be reported for over 1 ton. If you're a school or a hospital, you might beat that in a month. Like university. So it looks something like this. This is that electronics one. It's a lot to take in. because you report down the bottom, it's by row. Now it is done by, I think the technical term is sociopath. And if you looked at ours, like Canada, you do like Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, PEI, New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario, or you do BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and then the territories are at the end. No, they did alphabetically, and the territories in the middle. Except it's not even alphabetic. If you look down the bottom, you notice Nunavut comes before Nova Scotia. No, it doesn't. There's so many things wrong with this. Anyways, but they can't change it year over year. This is one of the funniest things about it. It's like because we did it all like we did it in order, like you would as you grew up in school. It's almost like doing the Pledge of Allegiance in the U.S. And I grew up in the S, and you get used to it. You basically do the province left to right or right to left, and then you forget New Brunswick. By the way, key thing: if you ask a Canadian what are all the different Canadian provinces, they'll remember nine, and the one they can't remember is New Brunswick. It's like Maine, but more so. Maine's got better like marketing. It's got a simple name. New Brunswick is the one everybody forgets about. Nobody forgets about British Columbia or Ontario or Nova Scotia, but New Brunswick, yeah. So if somebody's naming Canadian provinces, they're like, well, I got nine. That one's New Brunswick. Um, I spent a long time in New Brunswick. It's great, but it's like Maine, but more so. The state of Maine, but more so. Application for extension. So imagine you just realize I got to do my consumer stuff in 11 days. You can't. Cannot. But you can get an extension. You have to apply individually. It's similar to SEPA PFAS, except for they only give you a month. You have to email it here, and the contents of the application have to be on company letterhead, have to have the company legal name, CRA business number, it's your tax number, company address, reason you need the extension, and has to be signed by a company official. If you need help, reach out. By the way, we're easily the best in plastic registry. It also dovetails into life cycle assessment, which is fantastic. A life cycle assessment is more materials plus transport and energy, a bunch of other things. However, the hardest part of LCA is materials. If you're doing plastics, then you also do electronics and glass and metal and rubbers and stuff like that. And you just add the pieces of the process, and it's pretty easy to do together. Recap, plastics registry, deadline for submission consumer is 11 days from now. And it's only electronics though, and packaging and some very specific disposable stuff like takeaway containers. Industrial, which is and all the other consumer products are September next year. If you make it or import it and or sell it in Canada, they're all reportable categories. So even if you make it here and you export it, you still report make. Brand owner is responsible for the plastic waste generated. So the made, import, or sold is the brand owner. Plastic waste generated is the generator. So you might say, oh, I got a guy who takes away my garbage. It's their problem. Like, no, you generated it. They're the disposable entity. You're the generator. They might divert it. They're responsible for disposal, but your facility is the generator. Just because, waste management, somebody else comes and picks up my garbage, they're not the generator. I generated the waste, or we generated the waste that goes in that. So it's the facility is the generator. So as the plastic registry, I just want like the Minnesota and the plastic registry, the two big ones for next year. Tosca is also a big one, but once Minnesota's out of the way, Tosca is a reconfiguration of the data to a certain extent. Australia, upcoming restrictions. So Australia is implementing all the Stockholm Convention stuffs under ICHEMS. One of the weird things about ICHEMS, it's like the Australian EPA. That means if you're FDA, like medical or food contact, you're not in the Australia ones. So these are only non-medical. It's like anything EPA. It's like Tosca. So it's restriction on long chain perfluorocarboxylic acids, the PFOA and longer, same as Europe. That's July of this year. It's a couple months ago. You meet the EU requirements, you meet the requirements there. Restriction of dichlorane plus, which will be banned in EU momentarily. It's found primarily in yellow tape windings of a transformer. It's a flame retardant. UV328, it's in basically every LCD screen. It's in the front polarizer, the back polarizer. It's allowed, it's exempted. UV328 is exempted to like 2030 or 2031. It's also banned in Europe, but it's exempted in polarizers to 2030 or 2031. However, even though it's exempted from the ban, I'll talk about it, you still have a REACH SVHC-like requirement in Australia. You have a REACH SVHC actual requirement in EU. You have a REACH SVHC-like one in Australia. That's July of next year. And the ban of DBDPE, probably maybe the most common flame retardant electronics. Super, super common. It's not whether it's in electronics, it's how many times. Its restriction is June of next year. Now, it's banned except for in electronics and machinery and basically anything else that uses it. So it's banned except for everywhere it's used. So next June, it's not banned in your product, but you will have a REACH SVHC like requirement. So another thing most people don't know about ICHEMS, If a substance is used in an exempted essential use application, example, UV328 is exempted as essential use for a couple of years for LCD screens, and DBDP is exempt in electronics for 12 years, it's not banned then, you have a REACH SVHC-like disclosure requirement. It's very similar text. What you have to do is the importers must determine and provide information on the concentration by weight of the chemical in an article to the supply chain. It's like the old REACH SVHC. It's like this product contains DBDP above 0.1%. It's not necessarily 0.1, but we still use 0.1. Importers and users must keep the following information up to date and must produce this information if requested by a relevant agency. This is Australia. Way they structure it is the customs broker and import is to make sure this has occurred. So they actually, like asbestos, would put the burden on the custom broker. Otherwise, they get in trouble afterwards. The information on the identity of the chemical and its article it's used in. So we use UV328 in the polarizer of the LCD screens of our products. Where feasible, the total weight or annual concentration. They can ask that. They normally won't be expected to do that very often. And the justification for use. So it's UV328 in the polarizer, which is under essential uses under the ICAM regulation. That's the justification use. It's an essential use covered under the ICAM regulation. So this is the sort of thing that the customs broker is like asbestos is like going to need on hand. And the next group of that is UV328 in June, July. Ooh, it's a couple slides ago next year. And DBDPE in 2027. So other things to remember in 2026, those are the big ones. US TSCA being in there, but it's very related to, it's not related in terms of the reporting criteria. So the overlap in reporting criteria are actually quite weak. But once you've done Minnesota PFAS, you have a lot of the basis to redo it for US TSCA. You have to do it retroactively. You have to add volumes of parts, but you're way ahead. And there's something that's going to happen to the US TSCA. We just don't know what it is. So new EU battery regulation labeling in 2026. It has, by the way, the EU battery regulation has new labeling requirements in 2025, 2026, and 2027. What we often do is you're worried, send us your battery. We'll explain to you what labeling it needs and what deficiencies it has today. So August 18th, 2026, it needs this new labeling requirement that I'll show in a moment. Unless the former function doesn't allow it, you'll see what it is. It won't fit in a button cell. For a button cell, which won't fit on, it can be on the packaging or accompanying documentation. So for example, it needs information identifying the manufacturer, the battery category and information, large scale, standard, the place of manufacture, the geographical location of the battery manufacturing plant, the date of manufacture, month and year is required by August next year, the weight, the capacity, the chemistry like lithium ion, the hazardous substances present above mercury, cadmium, or lead as defined by the regulation. There will be additional hazardous substances for batteries in the EU battery regulation, but there are none right now. It's mercury, cadmium, or lead, and they have their own labeling requirement already. So this is kind of moot point one, usable extinguishing agent, and the critical raw materials present in the battery. I think there's like 4 of them, lithium being one of them. So you identify lithium. If you identify lithium ion, it's pretty easy right there. I can't remember offhand the four critical ones. It's basically lithium, lead, and 2 others. So if the battery has those, which lithium generally does, or lead acid, you have to identify them on the battery. Of course, you identify it's lithium-ion battery, the lithium is pretty implied. Plus, non-rechargeable batteries have to be labeled as non-rechargeable in the minimum hours of duration. Now, that's the battery regulation. Battery regulation has a lot of requirements. It is very poorly written. It's a modern regulation in the EU, so they have some good ideas, concepts, but it wasn't written well. This, though, is the label requirement for August 2026 for your batteries. If the battery can't fit it, which most batteries can't, it could be in the accompanying documentation. The new EU battery packaging regulation, on the other hand, is very similar to the EU battery regulation, but written well. The downside is it's very complicated for most people. They're all like, so many people asking for webinars on it. I'm like, okay, there's nothing much for you to do right now. There's one thing in 2026, and it's a paperwork exercise. So the packaging regulations written kind of intelligently. There will be things you have to do. Like in 2030, you're going to have to make all of your packaging recyclable according to 3 different options. But in 2028, we have to identify what the criteria and recyclability is. And if they don't meet that guidance deadline, then all the deadlines related to recycled packaging move back. So when they pick something, which all the things you have to do are in black, and if you're not food, there's not much to do early. This is what you're gonna have to do. And there's an earlier one where the EU has to do something, and that's the green ones, to define what your later thing is. So they don't have to know everything off the bat, and they can work with industry to create feedback and then define what the thing is you have to do. And so 2 years later, you have to do it. And if they don't define it in time, then your due date also moves back. So the big one in 2026 is you need a declaration of conformity and a technical file. CE marking is now part of the battery. You need declaration of conformity and technical file, which is mostly easy because there's only one requirement really today. You have to meet the materials restriction for lead, cadmium, and mercury. That's it. You have a tech file and a declaration of conformity, and that's all you have to do. You guys also have to have labeling requirements up to spec, but there aren't any for packaging. Battery there is, packaging there's not. There will be more materials labeling required in the second half of 2028. And they're defining what the materials labeling standard is right now. And if they don't meet that date, the new materials labeling standard, then your labeling requirement 2028 pushes back. So the only one in dark there, other than no PFAS in food packaging, which is very few of you, you're just looking at a DOC technical file, which is basically the materials restrictions that from the old EU packaging directive. Lead, mercury, cadmium, hexchrome. Yep, same as the ROHS metals. Battery is just lead, mercury, cadmium. This one's lead, mercury, cadmium, hexchrome. You have to be over under 100 ppm, I believe, total of each. Which, when we do packaging testing, the only problem is PVC clamshells. They have historically lead or cadmium as the stabilizer. They're mostly zinc nowadays, but they used to be lead or cadmium. There's also a consultation under the REACH restriction proposal. It's under the original ones. So things like banning PFAS in food packaging, PFAS in non-durable water repellent textiles. So the SEAC, which is the Committee of Socioeconomic Analysis, they're going to publish their details, and there's going to be consultation next March, which is a survey with questions. So next March, there's going to be a survey with questions. There'll be an online information session in October telling you what the report's going to be and what you're going to do for the survey in 2026. Now, this is mostly around the original restrictions, like PFAS and food contact, that kind of thing. The new, really complicated new one has to go through, with the new proposal from about a month ago, has to go through all the steps again. It's a restart. It's a new proposal. This is the original proposal, the restrictions that we're going through. So there is going to be another consultation or two next year. This is the one that's very, very tangible. It's mostly around the pretty well done deal restrictions, PFAS and textiles and food contact and stuff like that. The food contact one is half it makes sense, half it's really dumb. China ROHS table. Now, this one is not due in 2026, due in 2027, but it's something you want to get out of the way because it's documentation. The table is changing for the first time since 2011. It's not changing whether you do or don't have to have a table. If you have a China ROHS table today, you're just going to have to update it to include the phthalates. It's kind of what it looks like. There's a lot of different options. It has to be at least in Chinese, simple Chinese. It can be in simple Chinese and English, but you have to add the phthalates in. And all you have to do is mark an X if the substance is over the limit, or 0 if it's not. So you have a lead and thick film resistor, even though it's EU ROHS exempted, the exemptions don't matter here. You just have to put an X there because it's above the lead limit. So the implementation date for the new table is August 1st, 2027. It's a paperwork exercise. So a lot of people who have to change their manual, where it is, or an insert, it's actually very time consuming. So that's something that will likely happen in 2026. The other big one for 2026 is the greenhouse gas emission declarations in California. If you need help, reach out. They're mandatory. That link will take you there for companies over $1 billion revenue that are located in the US. It starts in 2026. Scope 1 emissions are the energy generated by your company. It includes if you have your own company cars, the combustion energy of company cars, not individual employee cars, is energy generated by the company, and you have to convert that to greenhouse gas equivalents. Scope 2 emissions is for the energy you purchased. Now, by the way, this 1 and 2 are all auditable, so treat it like a tax. You want to keep the receipts. What's the energy purchased by your company? Starting in 2027. So when you do your scope 1 and 2 in 2026, you have to do them again in 2027. When you do scope 1 and 2 again in 2027, within 180 days, you have to do the scope 3. Scope 3 is the greenhouse gas from the full life cycle of your product, also called life cycle assessment, which, by the way, I would do at the same time as a plastic registry. It's just easy to do. It's one of those things with the plastic registry for us. It created a high volume approach. So great data for lower effort for LCA, especially when you have a lot of products. And you have to have including the average employee commute and business travel. It's also passage on. You also, what's the greenhouse gases from the other things you purchase for operations? You usually put a placeholder in for that. That one's a bit odd compared to what the LCA GHG of your actual products, because anything metal in your products has huge greenhouse gas equivalents, and the operational life of your product, like a laptop running for 5 or 10 years, that consumes a lot of energy. So it ends up being there's some minor things like employee commute and business travel, where your average commute will actually add up for your average employee. The greenhouse gases for other things you buy, like toilet paper rolls and stuff like that, you basically use a miscellaneous section for that. And then in further years, if you really want to drill down, you get much more specific. But when in doubt, reach out. You need help for any of these ones, especially life cycle analysis. We're superb at it. Make life a lot easier. And again, focusing on the hump. You have a big hump next year, and the scope 1 and 2 emissions for California. The date's not clear, but it's going to be the tail end of that hump. So Minnesota PFAS, July, Australian Dechlorian Plus, new V328 disclosure and ban. So if you have UV328 in your screen, it's exempted, but you still have to have a REACH SVHC like declaration. The other big one is the Canadian Plastics Registry in September. Technically, US TSCA is still on track for October. It might be changed or watered down. We don't know what it's looking like. It's something to think about when you're done Minnesota PFAS. They are different data sets for sure, and one's forward-looking versus retrospective, but you should be able to use a lot of what you've thought through from Minnesota to make TSCA a lot easier. So any questions, feel free to submit at the control panel. I'll get to as many as possible. I didn't get to as many this morning. I apologize to them. I really had, unfortunately, a conflict. Okay. Good question. Is the 1K fee based on the assumption you only report one time, or would it work? Somehow work if you report multiple times? We may know by July what is being shipped to state through the rest of the year. It's one time unless you do a research. So a re-up is $500. I'm not sure what happens if you do partial reporting. We normally go if you group your products well, we don't worry about the granularity of what you're shipping because you're going to create one for your refrigerators. So it doesn't matter which refrigerators you've done it for refrigerators. So we try to make it so that minutia granularity is not required. What is the day the report is due? Is 2026 reporting based on 2025? So the professional one is due September 29th, 2026, based on 2025. So if you have facilities in Canada, you want to be collecting your waste data right now. It's easier to look back at your sales data retroactively. Waste data is actually much harder to do retroactively. How is PTF safe in cookware if it's the same as Teflon? Teflon's completely harmless. We test it all the time. This is one of the reasons we might test it. PTFE isn't made from the bad PFAS, the one they find in water, and it doesn't generate it. It doesn't create it. It's actually very unrelated. It contains like if you draw it on a screen, it looks the same, but your polyethylene food dish, if you draw it on the screen, looks very similar to alcohol. They're very different. They're both alkanes, but they're very, very different. Same with PFAS. So PTFE is absolutely harmless. When you find something in water, it's not PTFE. So PTFE, we do biocompatibility testing. It's not like bad like silicone or polyurethane, which do leak out toxins quite significantly or relatively. I'd still say relatively low, but compared to Teflon, not quite a bit. Teflon doesn't leak anything out of it. It's about as inert gets. It's basically polyethylene, but more so. What we have to work on is a better verbiage for it because PTFE, Teflon, by the way, is not necessarily PTFE. It's a name brand. It can be FEP, it can be TFE. It's normally in that family. Teflon's a name brand. FEP and is also completely benign. Um, I think New Mexico's got it better. The definition is kind of complicated. So it's fully fluorinated, perfluorinated, polyfluorinated, carbon-only backbone. Yes, those are all super safe. There's a few others that are pretty safe too. Those are all super safe. That's Phyton, that's FFKM, that's Calres, that's ETFE, that's FEP. Those polymers and polyrubbers are completely benign. They're one of the most biocompatible materials in existence. So why use them for implantables? The problem with PTFE is too many people get their science from journalists. And it's not the PTFE is a problem. There are other chemicals in the same family that are structurally quite different. Like the waterproof coating on your jackets is a fluoroacrylic. It's a different whole chemical set. it degrades into the most minute amount of PFOA. So it's in the minute danger side. And that's very different from when you're coating in a mill your taco bowls. So when people went from plastic to paper taco bowls, paper, I can take your printer paper right now, spill your coffee on it. Paper sucks at water prevention. So what they have to do for your new paper taco bowl is they have to fluorocoat it. That one is fluoroacrylics, produces a minute amount of PFOA, really, really minute in your food. I'm not worried about that level. However, the mill coating that plastic downstream of it is a bit more exciting. So that, yeah, is more problematic. And when you say, hey, this, like CBC is like, oh, here are all the sites that have um, PFAS over 30 nanograms per liter. I'm like 30 parts per trillion. I don't care. That's nothing. Um, if you take all the PFOA in all the water systems, basically in the US, it's less than the amount of DHP in one vinyl tablecloth. Like it's not the same magnitude. Teflon doesn't have PFOA in the family. It's not made from it. People say, well, it degrades into it. And land, no, it doesn't. The only thing PTFE degrades into it, if you get it hot enough, and you have to get it really hot because it's super temperature resistant, it will degrade into carbon monoxide. And you're like, oh, that's dangerous. I'm like, yeah, but your polyethylene would have done it much long before PTFE would. You burn your polyethylene, you'll get carbon monoxide too. Don't do it. PTFE can handle it much better. PTFE is polyethylene, but more so. It does everything better, safer, low resistance. I don't work for in that way for industry that way. We just have a test lab. And there are things that are very dangerous out in the world in the US and Canada. And there are things that are not. Teflon frying pans are one of the not. Now, people ask me, do you have Teflon frying pans? I actually have very few, and it has nothing to do with chemical safety. We can test it. They're perfectly chemically safe. It's just Teflon is not the most robust. It's a plastic. It's not the most robust material. So you tend to scratch through it. And my Teflon, I don't like replacing my dishes very often. It doesn't last as long. So I use for the high-end ceramic ones, just because they last longer, not for any chemical reason. Uh, if you answer the question, no, what is the day the PFAS report due for Minnesota? Is it 2026 based on 2025 data? Okay, key thing, Minnesota is forward-looking, not retrospective. Nothing you do in 2025 has anything to do with the Minnesota reporting in 2026. It's forward-looking. In July of 2026, you're reporting for what products are in and what PFAS are in them for the rest of 2026. It's all forward-looking. Canadian Plastics Registry, previous year. Minnesota, forward-looking. It's completely different. So that's why you don't have to know how many. And as people gathering data, doing sales data, I get their data. I'm like, this has nothing to do with Minnesota. So again, start with the output. The output is for each product family, which PFAS will they have or likely have this coming year in them, and what's the function of it? What would happen to know when, would you happen to know when Minnesota will have the PFAS ingredient reporting available for them? The webpage says coming soon. They have to fix this reporting problem, and then we'll see. So they have to first correct the 6 deficiencies, and then we'll see after that. Are foreign manufacturer distributors no Canadian legal entity required to report for the plastics registry? Well, they can't actually, even if you wanted to. At that point in time, it's the importer. Now you can transfer responsibility to someone else. Like somebody could transfer responsibility to us because we're Canadian, if we wanted to, which there are cases that's true, and we could report for them. But a foreign entity can't report the Canadian plastics registry. You need a Canadian CRA, and they're not responsible for that because not in Canada. Canada legislation doesn't go outside Canada, so you have to be an entity in here. That means the brand owners inside Canada, they're responsible, but if they're not, it's the importer, because that's the only guy inside. Good question. For federal plastic registry, I see that there's a blend of plastic resin. Report them separately. What if a vendor uses a plastic where the percent breakdown of the 2 different resins is unknown? Oh, polycarbonate ABS blends. We put them, we'll help you in any individual. The blend is usually under other thermoplastic because polycarbonate's under other thermoplastic anyways. So a blend of PC ABS is other thermoplastic. Same with MABs, unless the MAB is acrylic, methyl methacrylate ABS is almost completely methacrylate. So if it's, well over 90% one, we use its category, but if it's blended, we usually use the other category that applies. How would you find out the drop-down list of product types if the reporting form is available? So in so when the consultation happened in Minnesota, there's 2 different part 1 and part 2 of the responses. Part 2 has a description that they want to use the EPA list just supplemented. So it's like page 17 in part, something like that. Wanted to reach out, I can help you with it, and they talk about that. It's inside. Anything of interest is in part two of the responses. So the July 2026 reporting date is in part two of the responses to the industry consultation on the website. Part two's got the best one. It's just all over the place. Look for the word EPA in part two. The Canadian plastic template for September 2025 has a section for reporting plastic waste from commercial facilities. Do we ignore this part for the template? Agreed. It's not, you don't have to report, you don't have to report this value until 2026. Yeah, I know it has the page for it. It's actually, so they made the 2024 reporting, which is for 2025. So it becomes the same one next year. So it includes all the little foibles. So it has to have everything 2026 needs, but also includes the foible, like having Nunavut alphabetically before Nova Scotia. For Canadian federal plastic regulator, do the company lead need to be someone who can legally bind the company? It has to be somebody the company says can report. So it's a little different than the exemption application, which has to be somebody who can legally bind or official of the company. It has to be somebody the company says can do it. So if you go to the person who can, or go to lawyers and says, yes, you can do the reporting, that's all you need. It just has to be somebody the company has approved is the approved person for reporting. Is plastic reporting valid for those that only sell to businesses and the businesses sell to the consumer? So what you have to report is based on where that is disposed. So if it's a consumer product that you sell through a professional retailer, it's a consumer product. So it's consumer reporting. But if you sell a consumer product in a pallet and it's got plastic wrap and the business disposes of the plastic wrap before disposing, the plastic wrap is professional. So it depends where it ends up at the end of life, not where it will end up at the end of life, not who you sold it to. Please confirm federal plastic record. We only have to fill our plastic product tab for phase one, September 2025. I believe so. I can't remember the tabs. It's one tab. It's a massive tab if you filled it in, but just one tab. The facility one is next year. The resin one, if you bring in pellets, is next year. If the facility imports into Canada, is the plastic waste the facility in scope? It has to be a Canadian facility, and then any waste they generate, including employee functions, manufacturing, distribution, just the waste that is garbage there. The products you sell from that facility, no, that's something you sell. That's reported under sales. It's the stuff that ends up in your garbage or your blue bin, or you have somebody pick up to recycle, or like when you have mechanics, what they have to report for waste, if they're over 1 ton, is what ends up in their garbage, which could be packaging, could be food containers, could be car parts with plastic in them. Those are reportable. Generally, they'd be under 1 ton. The plastic containers, they have a different stream. They're all containers that are picked up and disposed if they're over 1 ton of those, which is small mechanics would not be expected to be. And then they also have to report the tires. They'll be over 1 ton, even for a small mechanic. So it's what the facility generates. If the car was also a dealership, the place, it would also be selling cars. They're not under waste generated, they're under products sold. Now, products sold is when it's put in the distribution channel. So it's usually not necessarily the dealer reporting products sold. It's often their distributor or the main manufacturer. So it depends a little bit. Some things like recreational vehicles that come in from the US, there is no brand owner in Canada. So the importer is often the dealer, and they end up having a report, which is kind of a technical challenge for them. But it is the brand owner of the product sold unless it doesn't exist in Canada. Do we have to do residential products again in 2026? Yes. And the data set gets a little more. Electronics doesn't change year over year, but in your plastic packaging, you also have to identify in 2026, the consumer side, what percentage is recycled, diverted, recycled, and how much goes in landfill. And if you don't know, you identify all landfill. Um, what is the regulation number of the EU packaging regulation? Ooh, good question. I do not recall offhand. Should be able to Google it. It'll be very modern. It'll be like 2024-ish. Very new. Canadian Federal Plastic Register question. If we are reporting plastics in the category EEE, switches and dimmers, but what subcategory would they fall into? So if it's a component that needs further integration before being used by the end user, they're actually a component, not scope. If they're one that, say, somebody can install in their house directly, it depends what they are. Um, uh, so we'd have just reach out and we'd help you directly. There's a history. It's the same as EU. So if you had to look at the European Union, which category are they? And which category would fall in the EU ROHS? And then use that category. So it depends on the situation. Lighting switches and dimmers. Reach out if it's category 11. There's a space for that too. But it's whatever EU ROHS category they are. For greenhouse gas emissions, do we need to calculate the emissions for all the company's employees, remote or in person? Can you explain more of that? Um, yes, there are details around that. And a big thing about greenhouse gas emissions, just be honest. Say we did the employees in this way, and somebody can say next year do it that way. One of the big things about greenhouse gas emissions is often you have a goal, and a goal isn't like you want to reach a certain level. A goal is like how much greenhouse gas were emitted per 100 sheets of paper or in total for the company. And you want to look at that. So you really want to say, hey, employee commutes cause this amount of emissions. And if they're remote and there's no commute, then you don't have to add it in. So you kind of define your criteria, and then often you'll have to do the average one. So one of the other ones, which is really important for when doing greenhouse gas emission, LCA, we normally do like, what's the average distance by rail, by air, and by sea for the product to get to the average customer in the EU? However, if it's really California GHG, then you really should be the average customer in California. But we can still use the EU one as long as you state on where it is on your website, it was the average EU customer was used. So what you want to do is when you identify, you want to identify in your disclosure the constraints around it. Can we average waste data based on 1 day collection? Sometimes. That's a great answer, eh? So what we actually do is we figure out your waste streams, figure out if you have a surge waste. So like for a retailer, they have a seasonal surge, like when all the winter stuff comes in, and it's not, and when you're an auto mechanic, if you have enough volume, what parts you're disposing of may change. So what we often do is say for those who want it over, 3 different days, different time period, and different days, and we can estimate a scaling for the surge. So what we do is we first want to figure out what streams you are. Like means you have stuff in a garbage, you have stuff that's taken away like bottles separately, and you have a tire. I use mechanics because it's really tangible to people. Figure out the streams, figure out roughly how much they could vary day to day, and then have a very reasonable waste data collection. But reach out to us. We tailor it a little bit to your specific. It doesn't have to be super granular. But in different industries, saying if I just do 1 day, it's not going to be necessary at all the same as tomorrow. So let's try to figure something out. Are there any exemptions for military and aerospace reporting for Minnesota or US TSCA? There is an exemption for anything that's under national defense. So if it's national defense, so basically confidential in that way, no, you don't have to do it for Minnesota. US TSCA, I believe national defense out, but I'm not 100% sure offhand. Does the Canadian plastic regime apply also to B2B component manufacturers? Electronic components? Yes, but usually only for the packaging because the component is not an ROHS category. So it has to be a finished product ready for the end user for sale, made, sold, and imported data. However, it is included in disposal data. So if it was electronic component was inside electronics and scope and disposed of by a facility. So like for example, for us, we have to do plastic reporting here, not because of the standard plastics, it's because we test so much electronics. Our electronics disposal levels are well over a ton, well over a ton. And it'll be all chopped to pieces. So we report components there because they're taken from finished products. So component manufacturers, if you're not directly in scope of EU ROHS, the components are not in scope. Your customer may ask about you, but your packaging is. So it's just the packaging side. The same thing we do with refrigerators. The number of SKUs a refrigerator manufacturer sells, the number of refrigerator SKUs is quite small compared to the number of repair part SKUs. It's quite large. However, they don't have to report the plastics and the repair parts the way it's structured right now, but they do have to do their packaging. So we do create average repair part packaging models for companies so they can do the miscellaneous category. The miscellaneous category is massive for a lot of companies in terms of number of line items. It's not necessarily the biggest in plastics, but it's one of the biggest in line items. We'd like to know if there's any ongoing research on alternatives or substitutes to PFAS in some of our daily use products. Yes, most of them aren't needed. Most PFASs in daily products are benign, and we test all the time, and the replacements are actually dangerous. One of the ones that is the PFAS in paper food contact. Yeah, that does release a very small amount of a toxin PFOA that is bad for your kidneys. It's by the way, PFAS dangerous all around kidney function. Everything they'll talk about many other things, but it all comes from a particular damage, the protein A surfactant in your kidneys. Your kidneys, your poison filter, you don't want to hurt There are ones with paper. They're not as good, but the ones under food contact make sense. The ones in apparel, we did the toxicology exposure testing. They don't come out of apparel. They're actually really safe. And one of the problems you're going to see in your winter clothing, especially in slush season, the new ones, unfortunately, the water doesn't beat up on it and it soaks through. So it's not nearly as good. You and your kids are going to get wetter. Maybe it was like, well, it's a dangerous chemical. We did the exposure stuff. It doesn't just come out a little, it doesn't come out at all. It's one of the nice advantages of waterproof. You can argue it might come out a tiny, 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 tiny. You can't even believe how small the number is in your wash because your detergent can get through the water resistance. But that's it. Like Teflon, I don't use aluminum. Aluminum is dangerous. I don't use aluminum foil in food contact. It's quite dangerous. When you have a lab, it's amazing what you can see. But I use Teflon. A Teflon wrap sucks for a lot from a practical point of view because it doesn't stick to anything. But it's a heck of a lot safer. So you use Teflon wrap for a lot of things for food contact. If the brand owner resides outside Canada, but the brand owner has a warehouse in Canada, what would the brand owner or warehouse obligation be? It is completely not based on where you're located. It's based on whether you have a Canadian Revenue Agency number. So when in doubt, take your company's name or whichever, and you put it in Industry Canada's corporations listing and see if a business number comes up. If so, then there it is. If not, no. It is completely based on whether you have a Canadian Revenue Agency number or business number in Canada, not your physical location. Also, if you're a very large multi-conglomerate and bought a lot of companies over time, you probably have a zillion different ones in Canada. Each one with theoretically have to report separately. You're allowed to agree, it's in there, for one of you to report for all of you. So that's quite valid. Perfect. Well, that's it for questions. Way over time, trying to make up for this morning where I did it. I missed a lot of their questions. I feel bad for it. We'll probably make this one the recording then. So people have a lot more Q&A. Again, everybody who registered will receive a copy of the slides, and there should be a recording available in a couple days. Thanks, everyone, and look forward to hosting everyone again. You need help with Minnesota PFAS? We make it so much easier. Canadian Plastics Registry, we make it way easier. And LCA, you'd be amazed how much easier and cleaner we make it. So please feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to help.